It's good to see everyone here this morning. I have a great opportunity to be out today. It's an exciting weekend for many people. This is the official beginning of summer and relaxed schedule. Schools are out. People travel and do exciting things, and that's certainly exciting. And also exciting because the congregation is about to enter a new period of time with Jonathan and Kate moving to work with us, and they will be here next Sunday. And I know everyone is looking forward to them being here and getting to know them and having them impact the work here, especially when we think about Jonathan and the teaching and preaching and having someone consistently in the pulpit is a blessing. And so I think we're all excited about that, and we should be. But today I have an opportunity to stand before you and preach, and I'm thankful for this opportunity and hope that this lesson will be profitable to you as we enter into this study. If you want to open your Bibles, we'll primarily be looking at the text of 1 Samuel chapter 17. Today I want to talk about facing Goliath. And most of us are familiar with the story of David and Goliath that we read about in 1 Samuel 17. This is not a fairy tale. This is not Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs or Cinderella and the mice and the pumpkin. This is a real story. David was a historical character. Goliath was not a cartoon or Marvel Comics person. He was a real giant that towered over people. And the event that we read about in 1 Samuel 17 actually occurred. This conflict between God's people and this intimidating giant. And as we think about what God's people faced then and what David faced then, I believe that all of God's people today can relate because there are many types of Goliath that we face in our lives. People as individuals, Christians as individuals, sometimes face huge and invincible, what seems to be invincible challenges in their life. Some people have health problems, and that's a part of them serving God and in what they do, coming to service. And the things that they do are always affected by that health problem. Some may not necessarily have health problems, but I'm looking at the top of the hill. Some people have already gone over that hill, and they're kind of looking down. But we're in the aging process. And so as we continue to age, our body continues to let us know, hey, we're, like we talked about in Bible class this morning, we're less of the young people who rely on their strength, and we're more like the old people who have gray hair, and we've learned wisdom from our past experiences. But we go through those things, and they challenge us. They challenge us in our serving God. And we all know what it's like to face temptations. And we all may have a sin in our life that has a particular grasp on us that we are challenged with continually, that we face and we have to overcome, and we have to constantly make the decision to do the right thing. And so individually, people have Goliaths in their lives that they have to face. And we have this in a sense collectively as a congregation and as God's people, as Christians today as well. There are things that challenge those who want to serve God. And we could talk about this for a long period of time. We could talk about the evolutionists who want to take God completely out of the picture. We could talk about the abortionists who want to redefine what life is and devalue life by murdering those individuals who are still in the womb. We can talk about sexual immorality, which is rampant. And obviously our mind might go to the homosexual movement today. But before homosexuality, sexual immorality existed before that. For a long time in the United States, people have been divorcing and remarrying at will. They haven't been considering God's plan concerning those things. And so they have been practicing adultery in their lives and do this without regard to God's will concerning those things. And now more generations are coming, and we see that these things are being taken further and further. Well, that's a Goliath. We face a Goliath. Are we going to continue to teach the truth and uphold the truth? Are we going to make sure that these young babies who have been brought into this world have a future where God's people are still standing strong and they're facing the Goliaths that are challenging us? Well, hopefully we will. And I hope this lesson will encourage us to do that. I hope this lesson will encourage us to be strong and to be courageous and to face the Goliaths that are in our lives today. And I hope this lesson will help us see that a little shepherd boy with God could defeat a giant warrior without God. And so as we begin our lesson, I first want us to consider Goliath himself. And again, Goliath seemingly was an invincible enemy of God. We will start there in 1 Samuel chapter 17 and verse 4. And it says, "And a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs and a bronze javelin between his shoulders. Now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels, and a shield bearer went before him." So he's a very intimidating person. First of all, he is a champion. When you think about somebody from an army that goes out and challenges one individual from another army to fight till death, you can't have a losing record. You can't be 33-2. You lose one, you're dead. It's over. This man has proven himself to be a winner, to proven himself to be a champion when it comes to that, to challenging one person to face him in conflict. And he has defeated probably numerous before. It says that his height was 6 cubits and a span, which would make him at least 9 feet tall, maybe more. And we think about 9 feet, that's huge. Shaquille O'Neal, many people know him, he was 7 feet 1 inch. Goliath would have been 2 feet taller than him. If he played in the NBA like Shaquille O'Neal, he would not jump to dunk the basketball. He would just reach over and put the ball in the hoop. That's how tall Goliath was. When the armies of God saw him come out, they were looking at a very huge, intimidating individual. We also see that his coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. That's 150 pounds. How many people in here would like to carry 150 pounds just walking out of this building? I mean, that would be hard and challenging. This man's wearing 150 pounds while he's actively fighting. He is strong beyond belief. He can handle this weight while he is also maneuvering himself as a warrior. And we see in verse 7 that the spearhead weighed 600 shekels. That's about 20 pounds. To give you some perspective on that, most bowling balls weigh about 15 pounds. This was 20 pounds. Now pick up a spear, put a bowling ball at the end of that, and how well are you going to maneuver that? How well are you going to control that? That's what this man was doing. He had a spear with a 20-pound head on it, and he could effectively use that because he was a champion. He had seemingly invincible physical characteristics that made him an enemy that people did not want to face, that people did not want to encounter. But as we also think about Goliath, we see that he had the attitude of a champion. He had that attitude of a warrior. In verse 8, he stood and cried out to the armies of Israel and said to them, "Why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistine said, "I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. And the Philistine drew near and presented himself 40 days, morning and evening. Goliath wasn't ashamed. He wasn't intimidated. I can't picture the leader of the army of the Philistines begging, "Hey, do we have anybody that would go out and face these Israelites?" And Goliath having to be encouraged to go out there. This man knew he was a champion. This man wanted to be in that position. He wanted to intimidate people. He came out for 40 days, that's almost a month and a half, twice a day, challenging people to come out and meet him and questioning them, "Why did you even line up against us? We are Philistines, and you're just people of the armies of Saul. What business do you even have being here? Find somebody, send some man out here to meet me in this challenge." And so we can see why Saul and all Israel, when they heard this Philistine, would be intimidated by him. But as we think about Goliath seemingly being an invincible enemy, what we need to realize is that he was not an invincible enemy. And we know the story. We know at the end of this story, Goliath fell. David cuts his head off, and he dies that day. His record now has one loss. He wasn't an invincible enemy of God. And I think there are several things that when we look at Goliath, and we can see why he wasn't invincible. And I want to point these things out because as we think about the challenges we face in our life, I don't want us to get overwhelmed by something that may seem to us invincible. The lesbian and gay and transgender and all those other words that follow that movement that's happening today, and we see so many industries trying to support that and promote that, and how they're targeting things towards our children. They're trying to persuade our children from an early age to accept those lifestyles. That may seem invincible to us, but it's not invincible. They are not going to win. They are going to lose, and they are going to be destroyed. When we look at people who arrogantly deny that God is a creator, arrogantly say that there's no intelligent design, and they try to explain everything away by science, and if you challenge them, they talk about how simple you are. "Oh, you don't even believe in dinosaurs." Well, I believe in dinosaurs, but I don't believe dinosaurs got here through evolution. I believe God made them. He made everything that was on the earth. When we look, science is their God. And we think about how our society has eaten all this evolution up, and we're so brilliant today that we can talk about climate change and what is happening to the world and what's going to happen in 15 years if we don't put electric cars on the road. And people are so swayed by this. We're told to follow the science. Well, if you really follow the science, you will see that science has not been predicting things accurately since the beginning. They are constantly changing. I remember a time when we were going to be frozen to death because there was going to be a global freeze and an ice age. But that didn't happen, and so now they've changed it, and now we're global warming. But when we think about that challenge, it seems to be so invincible. It seems like, well, we can't possibly defeat that. Politicians have accepted it and promoted it. The educational system has accepted it and then it promotes it. And when we think about that, what can we do? Little old me as an individual, little o us as God's people. Well, we can face those challenges, and we can stand up and we can be courageous, because as we see with Goliath, he was not invincible. One of the things that we know concerning Goliath, he was not invincible because he was arrogant. Again, back in 1 Samuel 17 and verse 10, Goliath said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. He wasn't mixing any words. He was talking down on the army of Israel. He was making fun. He was ridiculing the army of Israel. He was ridiculing God's people. And later on, we're going to see that when David spoke of this army of Israel, he spoke of it being the army of the living God. And he spoke of it as being the army of which God the host was the leader. And so by Goliath defying this army of Israel, he wasn't just defying those people, he was defying God. And when people today attack us because we believe that God created the heavens and the earth, they're not just attacking us, they're attacking our Father in heaven. They're challenging him. They're defying him. And we have to keep that in mind. When people try to force us to accept their alternative lifestyles and their changing of pronouns, and we need to respect that. As Target has taught us this week, even Satan respects pronouns. When we look at that challenge and we think, how can we possibly stand against them, we need to remember they're not just challenging us and defying us, they're defying God. And this is what Goliath did, and we see his arrogance. In our class on Proverbs, we learn in Proverbs 16 and verse 18 that pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. Can you imagine, for a month and a half, Goliath has been out there every day, defying God's people, ridiculing them, making fun of them. And then in that moment, that little shepherd boy comes through that dried up ravine, and he picks up some stones and he puts one in a sling, and bam, right in the forehead. In a moment, he is destroyed. Pride goes before destruction. In Jeremiah 9 and verse 23, we read, Thus says the Lord, Let not the wise man glory in his wisdom, let not the mighty man glory in his might, nor let the rich man glory in his riches. It may appear to us today, like it did to the people of Israel, that our Goliaths are invincible, but they're not. They're just arrogant, and there will be a time that their arrogance will lead them to destruction. But also, Goliath was not invincible because he had contempt toward God. In 1 Samuel 17 and verse 43, we see that the Philistine said to David, Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. It's kind of like, if Alabama was playing football and East Limestone High School showed up to challenge them. What's the use? What's the purpose? Should we even go out there on the field? This is going to look ridiculous. And even if Alabama beats East Limestone, is ESPN going to break news? And Alabama has just beat a high school from North Alabama. It's not going to do anything. But here we look at Goliath, and he's one of those soldiers to come over here, and a little shepherd boy. No armor is coming to challenge him and face him. What is he supposed to do in this situation? If he kills and destroys David, whoop-de-doo. That's what should happen. And so it makes Goliath mad that David is the one accepting this challenge. It's disrespectful to me. You're treating me like a dog. And so he cursed David by his gods. And so when we look at Goliath, again, he has contempt for God. He has contempt for those spiritual things. And today there are people that have contempt toward God and contempt toward Christ. They have contempt toward God's word, the Bible, and don't want to study it. And they ridicule people who would quote from it and read from it and live their life in accordance with it. There are people who have contempt for the Lord's church and think it's embarrassing, think it's antiquated, and we shouldn't be involved in that today. Times have changed, and we live in 2,000 years from the things that we read about in the scriptures. And so they disdain all that. They have no value for it. They don't appreciate it. But again, we need to face our Goliaths, because that contempt is what makes them subject to fall, subject to destruction. In Psalm 2, verses 2 through 4, the psalmist says, "The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall hold them in derision." Now I imagine that's what God was doing with Goliath when he was cursing David as that shepherd boy was coming there to accept his challenge. God didn't care how tall Goliath was. He didn't care how much armor he had on. He didn't care that his spearhead weighed 20 pounds and how capable this man was of being able to fight with those things. God was laughing because God knew how simply, how easily he could defeat Goliath. And that is what's happening with our Goliaths as well. God knows, and God can easily defeat them. We just need to have our confidence in God and not allow someone's contempt for him to cause us to question our faith. But also we think about Goliath. He was not an invincible enemy because he trusted, or he wasn't. We think about Goliath, he was not invincible. He fell, and he fell because he trusted in himself. In 1 Samuel 17 and verse 45, then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." When we think about Goliath, David came and faced him in challenge, and he was able to put him to death because of his confidence in himself, because he had confidence in his sword, because he had confidence in the spear, because he had confidence with the javelin. He wasn't even trusting in the gods that he believed in. He was trusting in these physical things and his ability to use them. And so because he trusted in himself, this led to his defeat. And the people who have so much knowledge about evolution and the origin of life, the people who have so much knowledge about gender and sexual relationship and sexual identity, all these people are trusting in themselves. They're not trusting in God. They're not trusting in God's word. They disdain those things. And because they trust in themselves, that is exactly what's going to cause them to be defeated. That's going to cause them to be destroyed. In Jeremiah 10 and verse 23, we read, "O Lord, I know the way of man is not in himself. It is not in man who walks to direct his own footsteps." When people direct their own footsteps, it's going to lead to their destruction. It's not going to end well. We need to have our trust in God. And also, when we think about Goliath not being invincible, it was because he overlooked simple things. In 1 Samuel 17, verse 42 through 43, "And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and good looking." And so the first thing he thought was simple was this little boy, this young man, not even a soldier, somebody that's come in from keeping sheep, is the one I'm going to face in battle. The one I'm trained as a soldier. I am a champion among my peers. I have all this equipment, all these things at my fingertips that I can use to defeat him. He didn't like the fact that he was facing someone like David. As we go on and read in verse 43, it says, "So the Philistine said to David, Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Goliath thought, if somebody's going to defeat me, they're going to have a better javelin than I do. They're going to have to get past the person that's bearing my shield before me. They're going to have to get past the armor that's on my legs. They're going to have to get past that coat of armor that I'm wearing and that helmet of bronze that I have on my head. They're going to have to get past all those while I'm taking my javelin and I'm trying to attack them. Goliath thought, I am well prepared. I have the best equipment of the day to win this battle. And here this guy's coming out here to me with a stick. Well, David obviously had a sling, but he's probably referring to David's staff as a shepherd. That you're going to come out here to me against and defeat me with something like that, you can forget about it. I will not be defeated by something so simple. And the people today, again, when we think about the Goliaths that we face, they think it's simple that we would go to the Scriptures and we would find our answers from God's Word, that we will live our lives in accordance with it, that we think that there's power in those things. And so they make fun of us and they ridicule us for those things as well. But again, they themselves are overlooking the simple. And with God, this is something that He has chosen to defeat those who are His enemies. In Psalm 8, verses 1 and 2, this is a psalm of David. David says in verse 1, O Lord, our Lord, how excellent is your name in all the earth, who have set your glory above the heavens. One of the things that we can do as God's people, or anybody can do today, is we can go out and we can look at the creation. We can look at the things that God has made and we can see glory. We can see how wonderful and how majestic those things are. We know those things did not happen by an accident. That the order that is in the universe didn't come from an explosion. That order came from intelligent design. That order came from God. That's what we see David saying here, that the things that we see in all the earth, they tell us about the excellent name of God and the glory that is above the heavens. But that's not all that David says about God being made known to mankind. In the next verse he says, out of the mouth of babes and nursing infants you have ordained strength because of your enemies, that you may silence the enemy and the avenger. You do not have to be a Hebrew scholar or a Greek scholar to know the truth. You do not have to be some individual that has gone to school and received formal education and have years and years and years of study to be able to proclaim the truth. God can make His will made known through babes. He can make His will made known through those who are young. God has chosen the simple things of this world to confound those who are arrogant and those who have contempt for Him. And so we should not be like Goliath. We should not lose our trust in simple things. He did, and it led to his downfall. We need to have our confidence and faith in God. So as we think about facing our Goliaths and we can see that they fall, I want to end this lesson by asking the question, how will we face Goliath in our own lives? And as we look at the text here in 1 Samuel 17, I think we can see different reactions. The first reaction that we see is the fact that when we look at Goliath not being an invincible enemy, our Goliath is not invincible, our Goliath is going to fall. We can face our Goliath like the soldiers in the armies of the living God of hosts. Again, in 1 Samuel, there in chapter 17, we see that they feared when Goliath came towards them and challenged them. In verse 11, when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. In verse 24, it says, all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. Can you picture that? The camp of the army. They wake up in the morning and they're probably wondering, is he going to come out today? Please don't come out today. We've heard it enough. And then there he comes. Here comes Goliath. We know what he's going to say. And then there's those men kind of shrinking back into their tents. I don't want to be out there. I don't want to see him. I don't want to hear. These men feared, and because they feared, they did not accept Goliath's challenge. They were going to let him continually defy God, continually show his contempt, and continually attack them. When we look at these soldiers, another thing that we see among them is that they accused others of having the wrong motives. In particular here, we're talking about the time when David came into the camp, and David heard this challenge from Goliath, and one of the soldiers told him, hey, the king has said, anybody that accepts this challenge, I'm going to give him great wealth. I'm going to let him marry one of my daughters, which that's going to make him part of the royal family, and then I'm going to give him tax exemption for the rest of his life. And I may have accepted that challenge to be tax-free. But David heard these things. And so he was talking to the soldiers. Is that the case? Is that what's going to happen? And when David is talking about these things, his older brother hears him discussing them. And we see his older brother's response there in verse 28. Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was aroused against David, and he said, why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. And so here's David thinking about this person needs to be answered. This person needs to face someone from God standing up for what's right. And his brother hears him talking about these things. He said, look, what business do you have even being here? You're not a soldier. You know those few little sheep that our dad entrusted you with? You need to be out there keeping those few little sheep, not in this camp worried about facing this Goliath, facing this giant. And your heart's not in it for the right reason. You're just proud, and you want to make a name for yourself, and you probably want the king's daughter, and you probably want to be in the royal family and have all that money. And so he's accusing David of having the wrong motives. Well, I have a question. What about the motive of Eliab? Where was he at on the first day, on the 10th day, on the 30th day, on the 40th day? What was his motives about answering Goliath's challenge? He wasn't doing anything, but when somebody was willing to do it, he was willing to criticize them for standing up and wanting to accept that challenge. We should not face Goliath today by being like his brother. If someone's standing for the truth, if someone's standing to do what's right, we shouldn't be accusing them of having the wrong motives and questioning their motives. We should be supporting them and upholding them as they stand for the truth. But also we could think about King Saul. Would we respond to our Goliaths today like King Saul responded? When we think about King Saul, he tried to discourage those who were willing. When David lets him know that he would go out, Saul said to him in verse 33, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and this man is a man of war from his youth. So Saul is saying, you can't do it. You may want to, and you may think you can, but you cannot go out and defeat him. He tried to discourage someone from God's people from doing what's right. Would we handle our Goliaths that way today? Oh, you can't do anything about that. It doesn't do any good to teach the truth. It doesn't do any good to try to have a Bible study with somebody. You're not going to convince them. You're not going to turn them away from their error. And so they just discourage people who's willing to do what's right. We should not be like King Saul and discourage those who are willing to face Goliath. We should not be like King Saul and try to put our responsibilities on others. When David convinced Saul, hey, I am capable, even though I'm young, I'm capable of going out there because I have fought the lion and I have fought the bear And was with me then, and God is going to be with me now. So Saul said, you know what? You're right. Here, take my armor with you and go. When we look at the text, we see there in verses 38 and 39. So Saul clothed David with his armor, and he put a bronze helmet on his head. He also clothed him with a coat of mail. David fastened his sword to his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. And David said to Saul, I cannot walk with these, for I have not tested them. So David took them off. Here is Saul. And if you remember when Saul was anointed king, what was his special characteristic? Head and shoulders above everybody else. Here is this man putting his armor on this young boy and willing to send him out to face Goliath. When we look at the Goliaths we face today, don't put your responsibility on somebody else. Don't say, oh, the elders face the Goliaths. The elders are the one that accept that challenge. They're the ones that go out and fight. And we just hired a preacher. He's going to face our Goliaths. That's his responsibility. No. As a Christian, as God's people, we all have the responsibility. And putting our responsibility on someone else is not facing Goliath as we need to face them. Well, that brings us to David. Are we going to face Goliath like David faced? And when we think about David, we see that David recognized the challenge. In verse 23, then as he talked with them, there was the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines, and he spoke according to the same words. So David heard them. David heard Goliath make that challenge, and so he knew there was something that needed to be done. We hear the challenges today, and we, like David, need to recognize that challenge. In verse 26, then David spoke to the men who stood by him, saying, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? That's what David knew. Goliath was defying the army of the living God. Goliath was bringing a reproach upon God's people. Something needed to be done. Couldn't just sit idle. We couldn't just sit and let this person defy God and show his contempt for God's people. And so when we look at David, we need to be like David and recognize the challenge. We need to be like David and ignore discouragement. Yes, his brother discouraged him. You're just a little shepherd boy. You're just in charge of a few sheep. You're not some soldier. Quit being nosy and down here in our business and get back home and do what you're supposed to be doing. David ignored that. When we look at David in verse 29, David said, what have I done now? Is there not a cause? And we need to keep that in mind today. When people would try to discourage us, that's the question we need to ask. Is there not a cause? Is there not a cause for us to stand up and fight and to defend God and defend those things that are spiritual? Is there not a future with these young babies being brought into the world that we want them to have something to be able to hope for? Yes, there is a cause. And so don't let discouragement hinder us from facing our Goliaths. Also, when we look at David, he trusted in God. In 1 Samuel 17 and verse 32, said, David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And he tells him in verses 36 and verse 37 why. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. Moreover, David said, the Lord, who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. David knew. He fought a lion. He fought a bear. You know, we think about fighting those things today. What are we talking about? Well, we have a long-range rifle with the scope, and we're maybe behind some bushes up in a tree, and we're shooting at something that's yards away. David would be essentially hand-to-hand combat with these wild animals that could kill him, fighting them with a staff and with a sling. When we look at David, he knew, God helped me then, he delivered me then, and with this uncircumcised Philistine, he will deliver me now. And so by his past experiences, he had learned to trust God, and so he was going to go in this battle by trusting God. And we will do the same thing today. When we serve God and do his will, we face challenges. As we face challenges and God is with us, then that builds our trust in him, and then we're able to face bigger challenges in the future. But if we never face those small challenges, we won't be prepared in the future. Oh, I will stand for the truth. I will go visit somebody who's erring. I will teach somebody who's lost when I become an elder. Well, if you don't ever do those things now, you'll never get to the point that you're qualified to be an elder in the future. You have to take advantage of the opportunity now to build up that trust so that you can take advantage of greater opportunities in the future like David did. In verses 45 through 47, we read that David said to the Philistine, you come to me with the sword, with the spear, and with the javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistine to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. This is not David being arrogant. This is not David being overconfident. This is David trusting in God, that God was going to be with him. God was going to do these things. And after this day, everybody will be able to look at this circumstance and know that God delivered Israel from the hand of the Philistines. In verse 47, it says, then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. Our Goliaths today that we fight, those battles are not won with what we think they should be won with our swords and our spears. Those battles belong to the Lord, and we need to trust in the Lord and use what he has equipped us with to defeat our Goliaths. And we can do that as David did. And then finally, when we look at David, he trusted his abilities. In verses 39 through 40, David fastened his sword to his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. And David said to Saul, I cannot walk with these, for I have not tested them. So David took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook. And he put them in a shepherd's bag, in a pouch which he had, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. Then David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone, and he slung it and struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth. That was not a lucky shot. I mean, Goliath is covered in armor, and there were only a few places that David could hit him. And it wasn't a lucky shot that David landed that stone in his forehead. David was skilled. He had used that sling before, and so he used his talent and ability to defeat Goliath at this time. And then as he promised, he took Goliath's head off. Verse 50, so David prevailed over the Philistines with a sling and a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him, but there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword and drew it out of its sheath, and killed him and cut off his head with it. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. When we look at David, he used his abilities. He used what his talents were to face his Goliath, and he was successful because he did the will of God. And if we are trusting in God and we're doing his will today, that's what we need to have confidence in, is our abilities. Our abilities that come to us from studying God's word and equipping ourselves in how to answer the challenges that we face. And if we do what David did, we also will be successful against our enemies. Our enemies may not be destroyed like Goliath in a day. I think about the Christians to whom the letter of Revelation was written, and they were written and told to be patient, to suffer, to be willing to suffer to the point of death. And if you're willing to do that, you will overcome. And that letter told them Rome's going to be destroyed. Rome is going to fall for many of the same reasons Goliath fell. Rome was arrogant, exalted itself against God. The Caesars made themselves a god and required people to worship them. And so they are told that Rome's going to fall, but that letter was written to people, and Rome didn't fall for almost another 300 to 400 years. There was time involved there, and there may be time involved in the things that we face today, but our Goliaths are actually enemies against God, and he will destroy them in their time, but they will be destroyed. We need to be like David and trust in our abilities and trust in God and fight against them so that we can serve the Lord and be blessed by him. Again, I hope this lesson will encourage us and strengthen us to face the Goliaths that we face. And it may be that you're here this morning as someone that is not a Christian, and the Goliath that you're facing in your life right now is, am I going to become a Christian? I know I have sins in my life. I know I need to be forgiven of those sins, but do I really want to be a Christian? Do I want to accept the responsibility that comes from being one of God's children? Well, you can be like the men of the armies of Israel. You could be afraid of that challenge. You could make fun of it. You can say you don't want to have any part to do with it. You could be like Saul and shirk your responsibilities. Or you could be like David, and you can have trust and confidence in God, and that you're capable of doing what God asks you to do because he gives you the abilities to do that. And you can obey the gospel this morning and be forgiven and serve the Lord faithfully the rest of your lives. If you're here this morning and need to respond to the gospel, then we encourage you to take the steps that are necessary to do so. And you can make that request known if you come forward while we stand and sing.